welcome everyone to another SDX Central webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by Enea. SD WAN and uCPE are two of the hottest topics in networking today, regardless of whether you are an enterprise or a service provider. And certainly a webinar that covers both topics is going to be very interesting. What we're going to talk about here today is SD WAN, and certainly a key topic within the SD WAN ecosystem, which is that of the universal CPE, on which many SD WAN solutions going forward will be based. And joining me today from Enea, I have Carl Monnier, who is the VP of Product Management over at Enea and an expert on the uCPE. And I'm Roy Chua of AvidThink. Let's talk about the key takeaways. So if you stay with us the next hour, here are the things that you will learn about uCPE and SD-WAN. First of all, we'll talk about why SD-WAN solutions and custom platforms are critical for enterprises and service providers. We'll talk about how the uCPE can be the foundation for these customized solutions and why it can improve the overall economics for the enterprise edge. We'll also talk about how a uCPE potentially can be that open and flexible edge platform, and how we can achieve scalability at the edge while maintaining cost effectiveness. And then finally, one of the key critical things that we've learned from our NFV days is that taking on virtual network functions and onboarding them can be a difficult thing. And Carl's going to talk about how Enea and the platform from Enea can make deployment, configuration, and the management of these VNFs relatively seamless. And so regardless of whether you're a system integrator, whether you're from the enterprise, or whether you're in service provider, I think you'll find some of the key lessons today very helpful, especially if you're interested in SD-WAN. So let's get started and define what SD-WAN is. In general, SD-WAN refers to all things at the enterprise edge. And some people view SD-WAN as a catch-all marketing term for all next-gen enterprise edge solution. And certainly there are elements of that. But what we do find in survey after survey, research house to research house, you'll find that enterprises are interested in SD-WAN, and they are interested in looking at ways to improve management and effectiveness of the enterprise edge. And so if we boil it down, there are a couple of capabilities that we usually see in terms of enterprise requirements for the next generation edge. One is the ability to do multi-link. Certainly MPLS is not going to go away tomorrow, but it would be augmented with direct broadband internet access from various sources, cable, fiber, and otherwise. And then beyond that, we're also seeing the rise of the use of LTE as either a backup link or maybe in the future as a primary link. And we're still on the bleeding edge with 5G, but certainly there is talk that 5G fixed wireless access could become a new primary link as well as we roll these things out. So multi-link is certainly part of it. And then beyond multi-link, you would have what you expect in terms of collection of capabilities at the networking level, from routing to security, including next-gen firewalls and the like. The ability to provide some amount of quality of service, maybe some WAN optimization, and to make it easy to manage. Most of these SD-WAN solutions usually are cloud managed, with zero-touch provisioning. You ship a little box over to the branch, plug it in, it calls home, and everything works magically. In some situations, enterprises may demand that the SD-WAN solution also provide branch capabilities, either local Ethernet access or as a Wi-Fi extension. And some enterprises may demand that the SD-WAN platform provide the ability to service chain other VNFs, either multiple VNFs from the same vendor, or more often VNFs from multiple vendors in order to provide you with more flexible services and the ability to swap in and swap out services as you see fit. And certainly some of the more advanced solutions will have what we call local cloud breakout, where not all traffic needs to be backhauled to the HQ or the hub but in fact can use a direct broadband access to go out to trusted services and thereby reducing bandwidth use. And so certainly there's a lot of other features, there's a huge collection of other features, depending on which SD WAN solution provider you talk to. There'll be a mix of these things. And so that's what SD WAN is. And then there are certain terms that we'll be using in today's webinar. And just so we're all on the same page again, we'll talk about some of these elements. One is SDN. SD-WAN, usually provides capabilities that SDN, software-defined networking, laid down as principles, and that usually is centralized control, separation of control, and data planes. Some element of programmability, and that SDN laid the foundation for what we see as SD-WAN today. And then beyond, certainly one of the key elements of a SD-WAN foundation is network functions virtualization, the ability to take what used to be physical network functions and move them into a virtual framework. And beyond that, we're also looking at what people are calling CNS, which are cloud native network functions. And in those cases, they tend to be a new architecture, usually modular microservices based and very often deployed in containers. But those are still, I would say, at the very leading edge. And generally, we don't see a lot of those yet. And so SD-WAN is the foundation application, which certainly can be an all-in-one box solution, or could be a VNF that provides the functionality we just talked about in the previous slide. And then beyond that, there are two other terms we need to get familiar with. One is the virtual CPE, or the virtualized version of the platform, the underlying platform, which may run on premises or at a point of presence, like a next-gen central office, for instance. And that provides the virtualized layer on which you can run multiple VNFs. And fundamentally, the last layer is the hardware layer, which is the universal CPE, the universal Whitebox, this aggregated platform that we'll be talking about extensively for the rest of the webinar. And so if you look at the diagram on the left, what we're trying to do here is to take a set of vendor appliances, black box proprietary, or gray box, meaning vendor software on what is actually white box hardware, but the vendor owns all of it, and migrate that into a disaggregated platform, either one in which is very SD-WAN centric, right? An SD-WAN solution is the base and the service chain other VNFs, or one that's a generalized uCPE where there's a universal open vCPE layer and SD-WAN happens to be one of the VNFs. And so those are the type of architecture that we see, at least on premises for the most part. And in terms of SD-WAN vendors, there's a host of many, somewhere in the 60 to 100 count range, and just about every security vendor has now self-declared themselves to be SD-WAN vendors. But fundamentally, depending on where they came from, whether they were from cloud networking, or the WAN optimization market, or the security market, you'll find the feature sets will have certain strengths, which will be usually dictated by their roots. And there will be certain gaps in terms of working towards this universal SD-WAN solution. And so certainly, for instance, a WAN op vendor will have stronger ability to categorize applications, and they may have more advanced capabilities to optimize some enterprise level applications, while a security vendor will have superior security capabilities, but may lack a little bit with regard to quality of service management or routing for things like that. But fundamentally, there's a whole host of a lot of edge solutions typically that are all moving towards this universal concept of what an SD-WAN is. And that just happens to be, at this point in time, what the enterprises want in the next generation edge solution. All right, so now that we've talked about what SD-WAN is and typical deployments using a uCPE architecture, then for an enterprise looking at all the different options from these different SD-WAN vendors, it's not so much just a solution platform, but it's also a business decision to be made, and that is do it yourself or purchase a managed service. And fundamentally, it comes down to what the enterprise needs. Some enterprises will have in-house expertise. Some enterprises don't. In enterprises which are multinational corporations or MNCs, to deploy SD-WAN may require the ability to negotiate and manage multiple service providers across multiple different regions. And even if an enterprise has in-house those capabilities, there may be more pressing projects, like for instance, cloudification, or multi-clouds, or other enterprise initiatives, which may be viewed as more urgent, and perhaps outsourcing your SD-WAN or purchasing a managed service may be the right business decision. And even if you've decided to outsource, there are different options available. Obviously, one is you can always turn to the SD-WAN vendor for certain, so who will be happy to take on that challenge. Or you can go to your trusted communication service providers, your CSPs, many of whom are now offering SD-WAN solutions. Or you can turn to a third-party system integrator or a managed service provider who would be happy to take on that integration challenge for you of managing multiple SD-WAN solutions worldwide and negotiating with different carriers, for both your primary links and your backup links and your tertiary links beyond that. And what we do see, and beyond sort of everything's own surveys, we've looked at other people's surveys run by other research houses, and what we're seeing is that there is a desire to adopt managed services, usually outside North America, outside the US specifically, actually. And for large enterprises within the US, there is still a preference to do it yourself. And in some cases, it's because they have unique capabilities in-house that they believe they can take advantage of. In some cases, enterprises may have unique requirements that they believe an MSP or a CSP will be unable to meet. And so in those situations, certainly, then the enterprises may choose to take a DIY approach. But regardless, what we see in conversations with system integrators and managed service providers worldwide is that they all view SD-WAN as an opportunity whereby they can come in and add value and take on the task of upgrading and managing the enterprise's next generation edge using SD-WAN and uCPE technologies. So that's certainly a business decision to be made. And if you're a CSP, or if you're an enterprise who decided to take on the SD-WAN build out, then there are a class of key SD-WAN considerations. We're not going to go into all of those at this point in time. And certainly we have research that covers a lot of these in much greater detail, from orchestration and management to trying to figure out how to handle multi-cloud requirements, how to handle multiple transports and make sure the routing is appropriate, how to ensure that the applications get classified quickly, how do you handle local cloud breakout, how do you troubleshoot and provide visibility, and very importantly, because the enterprise edge is certainly an area of concern for security, security and compliance is a big thing. And all those certainly are key considerations and are all very important. But today we're going to talk about more around platform selection and from a uCPE standpoint. And I'll get us started, but certainly, Carl from Enea will provide a lot more visibility and expertise around that topic. So where are we in terms of sort of SD-WAN deployment if you look worldwide across CSPs and MSPs? Well, what we're seeing is from people trying to build managed services around SD-WAN, we are sort of at the cusp of a Gen 1 to Gen 2 transition. And if you talk to service providers or managed service providers worldwide, a lot of them deployed in the last couple of years the first round of SD-WAN solutions. They were based around vendor-provided SD-WAN appliances, and it was just like an edge router or a firewall. They put a box in place, and many of those were x86 Grayboxes, so they were still built by many of the ODMs. But this was SD-WAN vendor supplied and SD-WAN vendor supported. So it's just like buying a box, you put it at the edge, something goes wrong, you pick up the phone, you call them, and they figure out how to fix it. So that was Gen 1. what we're seeing now at Everything is a lot of RFPs out there. And the RFPs, generally speaking, are looking for a uCPE-based SD-WAN solution. So they're looking at rolling out disaggregated Whitebox uCPE platforms. So why is that? Fundamentally, in our conversations with these service providers, what they're telling us is that they're trying to prevent lock-in. And so while SD-WAN was great, and in our surveys, enterprises actually find that the SD-WAN rollout does provide the improved bandwidth, it does provide lower costs and improved flexibility. The service providers are concerned that they get locked into a specific SD-WAN vendor, and they want to have choices. And beyond that, more importantly, what they feel is that they want to provide their customers with choices, for instance. And so in enterprises where perhaps a specific vendor firewall has been certified and is marked compliant, they want the flexibility of deploying that firewall without needing an extra box. They want to deploy the firewall as a virtual network function on the platform. And of course, you know, the SD-WAN platform in many cases can provide a service chain for that, but by and large, the service providers want the level of control themselves. And so that's some of the driving forces around that. Beyond that, they're looking for more flexibility in terms of deployment, as you know, first with VNFs and maybe down the road with CNFs. They want a platform that potentially can take advantage of the next-gen central office or points of presence where they can offload more sophisticated processing of the traffic, such as for security and traffic inspection, for instance, of a CPE onto a POP or a CO. So they like the flexibility. And they believe by deploying and creating a new framework based around uCPEs that they are in a better position to do that, and potentially provides a lower total cost of ownership as well for them. That allows them to be more profitable and allows them to pass on perhaps those savings to the enterprise. Now, that's all wonderful, but in our conversations with SPs, we're finding that the uCPE, the universal CPE, is not quite universal. There are multiple options for the platforms. No clear standards, right? So you have, you know, OpenCPE that AT&T submitted to the Open Compute Project, the OCP. Intel's got a select CPE platform. Dell EMC has its own uCPE for SD-WAN, and then the Whitebox ODM manufacturers, you know, pick a favorite. They all have their own variations as well. And the other thing around the uCPE is there's no common OS standards. Usually they're all Linux-based for the most part, but there's no open source options either. AT&T donated some code had roots in Vieta OS a long time ago and became part of AT&T's DNOS and was renamed as DANOS, DANOS, a project within the Linux Foundation. And they're working hard at it, but it hasn't come out yet. So it was targeted for end of 2018, and they're still working at it. It hasn't been released yet. And so there are no common standards. And what happens is that then the CSPs end up having to basically play the role of integrator and try to pick the best of breed for their SD-WAN uCPE deployments. That's what's showing up in the RFPs today. And so if you look at the components that make up sort of uCPE, and the economics behind that, and again, your mileage may vary quite wildly, in fact, but they have to integrate all these pieces and figure out, you know, how to charge for them and how to make money across these. And you know, the range from the base hardware, which ranges, you know, the cost is between $25 and $50 a month over a 3-year amortization, to the OS and virtualization layer, to the management and orchestration layer. And then beyond that, you know, there are VNFs, right? So a base SD-WAN, we've seen some cheap ones down to like $25 a month or $20 a month. And advanced routing and security can be, you know, $200, $300 a month, usually link dependent, plus your link costs, right? And will vary widely. If it's MPLS, we're looking at, you know, thousands of dollars a month. If you're looking at, you know, broadband internet, you can get a gig now for under $500 a month, right? So the combination of those are what make up your uCPE economics, and they push the limit of what an enterprise is willing to pay for the most part. But you could be looking at a bill from a couple $100 a month to still a couple of $1,000 a month if you still demand an MPLS as part of your overall connectivity strategy. But the goal here for the SP is to try to get reduced costs, certainly for the elements on the left, and try to make it as efficient as possible so they can make their margins in selling new SD WAN services. And so we're down to adoption challenges, and I'll set this up and Enea will go through and explain how to overcome these challenges. But they range from the cost of the base CPE, where in some cases, because VNS still have performance issues, they're looking at 8 cores instead of 4 cores, in some cases looking at 16 cores if more bandwidth is required. And so the uCPE becomes more expensive and it becomes much harder for the CSPs to make money with enterprises because they just don't want to pay that much. And on lower cost CPEs, there are still some challenges. Some people are turning to looking at FPGA acceleration or smart NICs, and that's still being worked through. Benchmarking and validation of multiple VNFs is still a significant effort. Someone's going to take it on, maybe the SI, maybe the CSP, but that's a road that someone's going to figure out before they roll services out into the enterprise. And onboarding of VNFs, as we all know, is a problem in NFV. It's a problem here with uCPE as well. And when something goes wrong, who steps up to be that single point of contact, to be the single point of responsibility? Certainly, uCPE is desirable. SD WAN is desirable. There are challenges. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Carl to explain how Enea can help. Carl?
Okay, thanks, Roy. Let me see if I can take over the controls here. Hi everyone. I'm here to talk a bit about the transition between the Graybox and the Whitebox, and some of the aspects of that involving, who's contributing to this, what are the different players, and how do they act together to provide a solution with the Whitebox uCPE. So let me see if I can take the controls here. Okay. Sorry, I see some lag in the controls here. All right. So first off, I'm here presenting and describing some about the Graybox versus the Whitebox. So in this picture, you see a Graybox on the left side and the Whitebox solution on the right side. And the transition that Roy already explained a little bit about is really about breaking out of the lock-in situation using a Graybox and providing some flexibility and the ability to adapt the solution and the platform to current and coming use cases and requirements on the platform. So basically taking a closed system consisting of hardware and the application and breaking it out into layers. The Whitebox layer contributed by a Whitebox vendor, the virtualization layer enabling the ability to run different VNFs at the customer premise, and then a number of different VNFs running on that virtualization platform performing different tasks for the enterprise. In the cloud, there is a management side where all management is basically centralized so that an IT department can manage the whole infrastructure from one location without having local presence at each branch office. So I will go into some details around this. And first, looking at the Graybox solution, there are some advantages of using a Graybox. Definitely, the Graybox solutions out there, they are ready for deployment. One vendor already done all the testing and QA and the integration needed to provide a full solution. And this is, of course, very interesting when deploying and wanting to go to the market without too much hassle. But there are other issues here, and it's about the lock-in. It's very hard to add features to these closed systems, and the customer is bound, or the user is bound to the price of the specific vendor. It's very hard to change the pricing by replacing components or comparing with competitors, because a Graybox solution is really locked into the customer's use and automation. So there are some disadvantages using the Graybox, and this is why vendors want to go to the Whitebox solutions. If we look at the Whitebox, there are some really good aspects. You can take different technologies from different companies and create the best of breed type of solution. And over time, it's possible to replace technologies that either are too costly or doesn't perform the right functions for the user. So it's adaptable and extendable. And many enterprises want to be able to customize and control the components within the implementation or the solution. And this is also provided by the Whitebox solution. The future-proven bullet here, this is really about the ability to take in more VNFs into the solution and replace hardware over time, depending on what the needs are and how the needs transition over time. So these are all good things, but there are some challenges. When building a Whitebox solution, you're dealing with multiple vendors providing different technologies, and somebody needs to integrate and make sure that everything works together, is configured in an optimal way, and have the right quality, not just as individual components, but also in terms of integration. And to do so, you have to deal with a number of different vendors providing these different functions, and manage these different vendors when troubleshooting, when integrating, configuring, and so on. So there are some challenges that you don't see with the Graybox solution. So in comes the system integrator. So the role of the system integrator is really to address these challenges presented with the Whitebox uCPE. So the integrator is becoming the middleman between the different technology vendors and the end users, interpreting the needs of the end customer in terms of requirements on the solution, and it coordinates all the different vendors providing technologies and provides a full solution to the end user by building the solution, and takes care of the support and the evolution of the solution over time. So as a system integrator, you're really dealing with a lot of different vendors, a lot of different technologies, and enabling them for the enterprise. We view this as more of a role that can be taken by either a managed service provider, it can be an individual company doing systems integration, or it can be the enterprise itself. It has a capable IT department that can take on the role. So in order to make the transition, we're going to look at a few aspects of making the transition. So in our experience, a lot of the users using Graybox solutions have created or established a dependency to the configuration of the VNF, so the application, that's the one application, the security application. They also educated people in using these different components and technologies. And it's very hard to make a big bang transition between having one specific SD WAN from a specific vendor and then transitioning to a completely different SD WAN and with its separate firewall, etc. So instead, you want to make the transition in steps. And the first step is really to replace the foundation, the hardware of the solution. So by keeping the VNFs that the enterprise is dependent on, and by keeping any automation and orchestration of the solution as is, and just focusing on replacing the hardware and introducing virtualization, it becomes a simpler transition to take the path towards Whitebox solution. So, and this is really the journey we see with a lot of the different enterprises that we work with. They want to focus on the Whitebox hardware first, and introduce virtualization as a first step, and then keep the VNFs that they already are dependent on. The next step, once the platform is established and the solution is ready for more capabilities, the user extend with the new VNFs and the possibility to replace VNFs, replace hardware, so that they can have the flexible solution that is future-proven by basically providing a variety of different VNFs for the needs of the enterprise. And the typical step in extending the feature set is really to introduce a separate security VNF in parallel to the SD WAN VNF. By doing so, you take a small step towards breaking out of the dependency of the Graybox SD WAN VNF, and have the ability to manage security separate from the networking. On the management side, in the cloud side, it comes natural to add more VNF manager in the cloud to manage the different VNFs on the solution, and typically different ways of automation are used to create a common interface for managing the VNFs of the box. One example of this is to use orchestration. Another example is to use automation frameworks. Okay, so now it's time for the first poll question. And it is, when do you expect to deploy SD-WAN on the uCPE? And the options are in less than 1 year, in 1 to 2 years, in more than 2 years, and no plans. So please, everyone, make your selection. Our experience in the market is that we start to see this transition between first gen and second gen that Roy described, and companies are considering or implementing uCPEs for SD-WAN moving forward. So let's see what the results are.
Yeah, agreed, Carl. Certainly, that's what we're seeing, and there's a lot of RFPs out there for sure.
Yeah.
And they're all looking for uCPEs. I mean, this is worldwide, Europe, America, Asia as well. So
yeah, yeah, and I think it's a result that really reflects on where the market is. So a lot of companies are executing on their plans to deploy with uCPEs right now or in the near future, and a lot of the companies are also planning to do so within a short time frame. While others are still in the Graybox domain, I would say. So what do you say, Roy? Is this result reflecting what you see in the market?
I think fundamentally we're seeing 70% in the next less than a year to 1 to 2 years. I think that makes sense. That makes sense, and certainly there are others who are not looking at it, and I'm not surprised. So yeah. I would say that 70% in the next year to two, it's consistent with what we're seeing in terms of service providers and managed service providers worldwide.
Right. Great.
Excellent.
All right. Let's see if I can. Okay. So next is to give a short example of a company that's going to make the transition. So let's say we have a company with an enterprise with 1,000 branch offices. Of course, there are many variants here, but 1,000 branch offices is quite a lot, based on MPLS networking, a Graybox user, and have a centralized IT department. And typical for this kind of company would be to continue to have a centralized IT department managing all the different branch offices from remote, and managing the Whitebox uCPE from the cloud. The journey for this typical company would be to transition from MPLS to SD WAN with the goal of saving cost, and also to prepare to have more VNFs in the system beyond just SD WAN and replacing MPLS. In many cases, we also see that these companies, they don't really have or want to have local expertise, local IT expertise. Instead, they want to have a solution that is easy installed and easily maintained on the local premise and managed from the central office instead. And of course, they want to use a white box solution to be able to mix and match different white boxes for the different needs. In this case, the enterprise would first off determine what their legacy is. I mean, it's important to make sure that you are able to make the transition without completely disrupting the operation. And one thing is to identify what VNFs that the company is dependent on. And also, of course, the education of the staff, managing the system, etc. To keep all this in mind. Next step is, of course, to choose a white box and choose a virtualization solution and to estimate the capacity needed for the different branch offices, because that's going to be reflected in the size of the white box. A third aspect here is how do you enable this simple installation when you don't have local IT staff and you don't want to send people to all these different small offices to do the installation. So you want to have a way of simplifying the provisioning of the hardware to enable the zero-touch provisioning and to have a central management. Basically, have the box shipped to each branch office and make the transition with some local representative in a really smooth way without too much service interruption. We have had examples of wanting to do this within 30 minutes, for instance. Okay, so let's say the user is, or the enterprise has decided to go down the white box route to get the best of breed technology now and in a future solution. To make sure that they avoid lock-in by being able to replace the different technology components, hardware, VNFs, etc., and to manage the cost over time by comparing different technologies and choosing the best technology that fits the enterprise needs. So in order to do so, there are many ways of course of managing such a project, but the typical way we see it is that there is a managed services provider that builds a solution based on the white box. So the managed services provider, it establishes contact with the VNF vendors and build a catalog of VNFs that they can provide to the enterprise. They establish a relation with the virtualization vendor, with the white box vendors that they want to use. And then they build a complete solution, including quality assurance and integration and optimization in-house or with the help of professional services. And this is then provided to the enterprise as a managed service. Another model is to use the systems integrator. And this is the model that's commonly used for enterprises that wants to do the implementation themselves, but they lack some of the capabilities in their internal IT. So the enterprise in this case, they want to have control of the solution and maybe adapt the solution to their specific needs. So they use a third-party system integrator to basically provide a customized solution for this enterprise. A third model is that when the enterprise is big enough and capable enough to take on the task of building the solution themselves. And this is quite common, especially in companies that are larger, possibly having a global presence. they typically have a very capable IT department that can take on the systems integrator role themselves. And in those cases, the enterprise themselves needs to manage the VNF vendors, virtualization vendors, and Whitebox vendors. So these are the three models that we typically see. All right, so pull question number 2. How do you plan to buy or build your uCPE solution? Is it in-house integration? Is it by using a systems integrator? Is it by buying a managed service? Or are there no plans, basically? So please make your selection. And as I said previously, I think the choice of in-house integration, systems integration, buying managed services is very much dependent on the company itself and the capabilities of the company. So what do you say, Roy?
I think this is going to be an interesting one.
Yeah. I am expecting a mix.
Yeah, I'm going to be curious to see. I'm going to be curious in terms of where they stand. I think in many cases, people may believe that they can take it on themselves, and that was the case, I think, with a few service providers that I've actually spoken with, and some of them are actually quite large, and they're not as large as the tier 1s, but they're like tier 1.5, tier 2s, and they thought they could do it initially, and I think they realized later on they needed partners, and there was more complexity than they felt, and so some of them now I know are deciding whether to build out capabilities internally and whether that's strategic, or in other cases they're looking at partners. And I know that the SIs, many of the large SIs are building their teams, ready to take on this task, because there is a lot of money there, that's for sure. And enterprises really do see benefits in SD-WAN and want to deploy it. So, yep, I think we're seeing the results. It's a mix.
It's
yeah.
a very even mix here.
Yeah.
And
not
maybe
surprised.
Reflecting what you said about taking it on yourselves first.
Yep.
You go at it.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, great. So for the final stage here, final set of slides here, I'm going to introduce the Enea NFV Access virtualization platform. For you guys, it's going to be very short. So Enea NFV Access, it's a pure play virtualization platform, meaning that it really adapts to the philosophy of using a Whitebox based solution. It only addresses the specific layer of virtualization from a runtime platform and from a management perspective. It's providing a solution that really enables enterprises to build open Whitebox uCPE solutions. We support any Whitebox, Intel and ARM. We support any VNF. We are onboarding VNFs continuously as customer demands dictates, and it supports any systems integrators. So we are collaborating with many different systems integrators to provide solutions to enterprises. And one of the aspects that Roy brought up before was the cost of the hardware and how to reduce the cost of the hardware in building these kind of solutions. And our choice has been to not use OpenStack for the solution. Instead, we use NetConf, and this gives us the ability to really reduce the hardware footprint of the platform, leaving a lot of room for the VNFs to perform their task, and in the process enabling customers to deploy solutions on cheaper hardware solutions, basically, or hardware platforms. Here's a slide showing an overview of the Access platform with its runtime on the right, providing an accelerated data path for the virtualized function, the VNFs, and then security and systems management. And the focus we've had is really to slim down and the feature set to minimize the footprint of the platform and only perform the task that is absolutely necessary for the solutions. And with the uCPE manager providing a lot of the management functions needed for automation, for VNF management, for lifecycle management, etc., needed to deploy this type of solutions. It integrates well with higher level orchestration and automation, as well as with different VNFs and Whiteboxes. All right, and here is an overview of some of the partners we work with on the software and hardware side, and we are continuously adding partners here. What we don't show in this slide is our system integrator partners, but we are continuously adding more to cover more grounds with different solutions for different enterprises. So finally, just the same the use case for the enterprise now with Enea. So the customer wants to determine the legacy dependency, and since our platform is open for any VNFs, any Whitebox, any orchestration, it's really open to enable any legacy dependency required by the customers. Focus on building the base. So this is a pure play virtualization platform. Is really about enabling the Whitebox for the solution and providing the capability of running this VNS. And on the simple or enable the installation, we do provide a solution that really simplifies the procedure of deploying or provisioning a uCPE Whitebox at the customer premise without any specific expertise on the staff in the branch office, leaving all the management in the central office and providing the full automation required to make the switch smoothly. Of course, this doesn't cover all the aspects of deploying or integrating a solution. It just gives some specific examples. And please talk to Enea if you are interested in other aspects of this specific area. All right, thank you very much.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Carl. And we're going to go on to the Q&A. Again, for the audience, please go ahead and submit your questions using the Q&A capability in the Zoom client. If for whatever reason, as Toby indicated, we are not able to get your questions to your question today, not to worry. Those questions will go to the clients, to the Enea team, and they can address it after that. So please feel free to go ahead and submit those questions. And let me go ahead and take a look at the question queue now and see what we have. So I think one of these questions here addresses actually one of the questions I had, which is from the Enea side, how do you handle support issues if the SD WAN solution, on the uCPE has 4 or 5 different vendors involved, right? What have you seen?
Yeah. The typical setup is really to have the systems integrator take care of the initial analysis of the faults, and to go with different vendors in terms of troubleshooting and identifying where the problems are. And our contribution there is to provide good tools and capabilities within our product to do troubleshooting. But of course, in the process of building these kind of solutions, the systems integrator builds a lot of competence about how the system is built, how the different components interact in order to find these issues.
Got it. Understood. Very good. Let's see, moving on to the next questions. Again, audience, go ahead and feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A capability. Next one. You describe, the sort of the process for replacing, going from Graybox to a Whitebox. Now, do you have any suggestions in terms of expectations on timeframes? Like how long would it typically take? The question here specifically is, how long would it take to replace a hardware solution with a Whitebox uCPE?
Yeah. So there are of course a couple of different aspects, and it varies depending on the requirements. But we have seen cases where system integrators have been able to create a integrated solution using multiple VNFs and white boxes within a couple of weeks in order to provide them to their enterprise customers. And then, of course, in terms of deploying and adapting the solutions, typically you take it in stages and making sure that that everything works. But it can be quite fast.
That's pretty quick. Yeah, a couple of weeks is definitely that's very reasonable and actually quite fast. So that's impressive. Very good. Let's see. And another question here in the queue. In your opinion, what is the smallest branch office size for which the uCPE business case makes sense? It's an interesting one, actually. But what do you think?
Yeah, so actually we have seen some cases where you actually want to deploy a single VNF on a really small box. So since we are able to fit into the platform itself with Enea, it only consumes less than a core and less than a gig of RAM. We've seen examples where customers are looking at a single VNF consume and the platform consuming 2 cores and 2 gigs of RAM. In those cases, of course, the solutions or the SD WAN functionality is very limited. And it could be, cases such as connecting a local shop, to internet or something like that, with very few users or single user.
Got it. But the advantage, obviously, is that there is still cost economics that work in your favor. But obviously, the advantage of that is that you have a single orchestration solution, a single scalable CPE solution, right, with the same platform, with the same OS, regardless of size of deployment, and you have flexibility later on of swapping those boxes out and putting more VNFs if you need to, instead of having a uCPE plus Graybox solution, you have a uCPE solution that can work well regardless of the size. So very interesting, very good, excellent. Let's see, next question coming in here. Do you need some specialized OS for the uCPE? Or can you use OpenStack? What's the role of OpenStack in deployment?
Yeah, so we see some deployments with OpenStack for sure, and it's used. But I think it's in our opinion, OpenStack was really built for data center type of deployment, and in the case of uCPE, it's in many cases a single or very few boxes that needs to be running, and OpenStack becomes a little bit complex and resource consuming. So we have chosen a different path, basically. But there is definitely examples of OpenStack being used in the uCPEs in the market today.
Got it. Now, speaking of OpenStack and orchestration and the overhead of orchestration, I have a related question here that just came in. It says, what orchestration frameworks are supported today by the solution?
Yeah, so basically, when we deploy with orchestration, which not every customer actually needs, but in those cases, we allow our customers to pick and choose, and we contribute with the open APIs to do the integrations. So far, we have integrated with, we have demonstrated integrations publicly with 2 different vendors. That's Cloudify and CloudOps. But we are working on others that are not.
Understood. But as long as you have rich northbound APIs, right, to the orchestration frameworks and all the key capabilities exposed, then there should be no reason why you can't integrate with any of the major orchestration frameworks or proprietary ones even out there, right? So that's very good, excellent. At this point, we reached the top of the hour. And again, if you have your last minute questions, get them in there. And it's not an issue. The Enea team can follow up with you after that. So if you have a pressing question that we haven't gotten to and you're hoping that someone would ask it, but someone hasn't, get those questions in there right now. With that, I would like to thank Carl and Enea for their participation and their sponsorship of today's webinar. It was a pleasure speaking with you, Carl, today and presenting the benefits of uCPE in an SD WAN environment. And thank you, audience, for staying with us the last hour. We hope you found it helpful and useful. And please feel free to share the link once the recording is available with your colleagues and friends who may find it valuable as well. And with that, I'd like to sign off and thank Carl once again for his time and his presentation. Thank you.